Chapter 1, Verse 8. So far, in verses 4, 5, and 6, we saw the Pandava army representing the positive forces of yoga: discipline, devotion, self-mastery, pranayama, and awakened chakras. In verse 7, Duryodhana starts to showcase his Kaurava army and their commanders to Guru Dronacharya. Now, in verse 8, one by one, we will study the Kaurava warriors. Let's start with the literal meaning of the shloka first, and then we will deep dive into its symbolic meaning in spirituality. Bhavan Bhishma Karnascha Kripascha Samitinjaya Ashvatthama Vikarnascha Somadatta. That means Duryodhana proudly points out the chiefs of his army. He says to Dronacharya, "On my side the great leaders are yourself, O Drona. Along with you stand Bhishma, Karna, Kripa, the ever-victorious, Ashvatthama, Vikarna, the mighty son of Somadatta, and Jayadratha. These are the chief warriors leading my army." So in this verse, we will explore Dronacharya himself, grandsire Bhishma, the invincible Karna, Kripacharya who has never been defeated, Dronacharya's son Ashvatthama, the brave Vikarna, the powerful son of Somadatta and Jayadratha, who stand ready to command Duryodhana's Kaurava army. But these warriors are not just historical figures, they are inner forces that oppose our spiritual progress. Let's explore them one by one. As we are already familiar with Guru Dronacharya, let's start with him itself. I will shortly summarize its spiritual meaning. Duryodhana first names his teacher Drona. Spiritually, Drona represents habit, the deep impressions left by past thoughts and actions called sanskaras. Habits shape our tendencies. They lie dormant like seeds, waiting for the right conditions to sprout again. Even when we try to change, old habits often rise up to resist us. Thus, Drona symbolizes the inertia of our past, powerful tendencies that keep us bound unless burned by wisdom. Now we deeply understand the meaning of Bhishma. Bhishma, the grandsire of the Kuru dynasty, represents the ego, the deep-rooted I consciousness that identifies with body and mind. The ego is like a king that frightens and commands the 5 elements of nature to create and sustain the body. It is the strongest force siding with material desire. If you remember story from Mahabharata about him, Bhishma had the boon of choosing the moment of his death. No one could kill him unless he himself desired it. This story carries a profound inner meaning. Until we truly wish to be free from our ego, no external force can liberate us. Freedom arises only when the longing for egolessness awakens within. If we resist this inner journey through meditation and wisdom, then the outer world, driven by ego, creates so much suffering that we are eventually pushed toward the path of spirituality, aligning with the Pandavas within us. That is why it is said, ego kills ego. Even in the Mahabharata, Bhishma revealed the secret of his own defeat to the Pandavas. Likewise, ego itself ultimately opens the doorway for its own dissolution, proving that indeed, ego destroys ego. At the deeper level, there are different shades of ego, like for example, physical ego, ego that tied to body and senses, astral ego, ego that linked with subtle mind and intelligence, divine ego, ego when the I is rooted in wisdom and reflects the soul. But in the context of this verse, Bhishma stands for the ego still influenced by sense mind. He is the most powerful obstacle on the path of yoga, the hardest warrior to defeat. Now the Karna, the one of the most famous characters in Mahabharata. Karna symbolizes attachment to pleasure. He was born of Kunti through the sun god, yet abandoned and raised elsewhere. Though related to the Pandavas, he chose to side with Duryodhana out of loyalty. This reflects how attachment works. Even when we know the higher truth, we cling to pleasures and desires, justifying them as our duty. Karna shows us how attachment blinds us, making us rationalize our weaknesses. Now, Kripacharya. Kripa represents avidya, ignorance. This is not lack of information, but a mistaken perception of reality. Seeing the temporary as eternal, the impure as pure, the non-soul as soul. Avidya is like a fog that makes us cling to illusions and mistakes. It is powerful because thoughts themselves are creative forces. Under delusion, man clings to false securities and mistakes them for truth. Interestingly, in the Mahabharata, Kripa survives the war. Symbolically, this means that individuality itself can never fully vanish in creation. It must exist to play out the drama. But for the yogi, avidya loses its binding power when wisdom dawns. Now Vikarna. If Karna symbolizes attraction, Vikarna symbolizes repulsion. Devesha means aversion, pushing away what feels unpleasant. But this is not true discrimination. It is simply reacting with dislike. Likes and dislikes both bind the mind. True freedom comes only when we rise above both. Now, son of Somadatta, which is nothing but Burishravas. Burishravas represents karma, or material action. Every ego-driven action produces consequences that bind us, whether in this life or the next. Good karma may uplift us. Bad karma may bind us in suffering. But both are chains unless they are dissolved in wisdom. The yogi seeks to perform action without bondage, offering all fruits to God. Now, Jayadratha. Jayadratha symbolizes body-bound consciousness, the deep clinging to life and fear of death. Even great saints struggle with this subtle attachment. The long-caged bird, reluctant to leave its cage. This instinct of self-preservation is the last and strongest thread tying man to the mortal frame. Unless conquered, it keeps us revolving in the cycle of birth and death. And finally, Ashvatthama. Purposely I have kept his name at end of the list because it has special and deeper meaning. Ashvatthama represents latent desire seeds. These are not the fresh desires we can control, but the deeply stored impressions of past unfulfilled desires. These lie in the subconscious, waiting for the right moment to spring forth, often overwhelming us unexpectedly. At the end of the war, Ashvatthama survives but is rendered powerless, symbolizing that even when the yogi attains liberation, these desire seeds lose all power to bind. That's why unless and until we could not conquer our desires by knowing the divine reality through meditation, we need to bind in large number of cycle of birth and death. So, in this single verse, Duryodhana reveals the 8 great obstacles on the yogic path: habit, Drona; ego, Bhishma; attachment, Karna; ignorance, Kripa; repulsion, Vikarna; material action, Burishravas; latent desire, Ashvatthama. Patanjali too described these obstacles in the Yoga Sutras as the 5 kleshas: ignorance, ego, attachment, aversion, and body clinging. Together with karma and desire, they form the army of inner enemies. The war of Kurukshetra, then, is truly the war within. On one side, the Pandava army of soul qualities. On the other, the Kaurava army of sense tendencies and desires. When we recognize commander from Kaurava army within, name them, and fight them with the weapons of yoga and wisdom, and then we move closer to victory, the victory of the soul over matter. Gita urges us to awaken our inner Arjuna, guided by Krishna consciousness, to conquer these foes. Thank you.